Chosen ones, this week will be deadly if you ignore God's voice. The signs are all around you, whispering truths that demand your attention. You feel it in your bones, a shift, a pull, a moment where everything could change or crumble. God is speaking, not in riddles, but in clear warnings, guiding you through a week that holds the power to reshape your life. If you turn away, you risk losing what He's prepared for you. But if you listen, you'll step into a destiny so bright it will outshine every shadow. This isn't about fear, it's about focus. The world is loud, bills piling up, voices shouting opinions, chaos pulling at your peace. But God's voice cuts through it all, steady and unshakable. It's the quiet nudge that wakes you at night, the sudden clarity in a crowded day, the verse that lingers in your mind. You know it when you hear it. It's not a suggestion, it's a command. This week, that voice is your lifeline. Ignore it, and you could stumble into traps you never saw coming. Embrace it, and you'll walk through fire untouched. Pause for a second. If this is resonating, claim it. Drop a 777 in the comments to declare you're ready to hear God's voice. That number carries power. It's a signal to the heavens that you're tuned in, not distracted. Do it now, and let's keep moving forward together. You're not here by chance. You're a chosen one, marked for a purpose bigger than yourself. This week, God's voice isn't just guidance, it's a shield. Think of David facing Goliath. The world saw a giant, but David heard God's whisper, "I've got you." One stone, one truth, one victory. That's what's at stake this week, your victory. But victories don't come to those who close their ears. They come to those who listen, act, and trust. What's God telling you right now? Maybe it's to forgive someone. Maybe it's to walk away from a situation draining your soul. Maybe it's to step boldly into something you've been avoiding. The enemy knows this week is pivotal. That's why distractions will hit harder than ever. Doubt will creep in, whispering lies that you're not enough, that God's forgotten you. But those lies only work if you let them. God's voice is louder, stronger, truer. Picture Moses at the Red Sea, waves crashing, enemies closing in, no way out. But God spoke, and the sea parted. This week, your sea is waiting to split. The question is, will you stand still and hear Him, or will you run from the pressure? Your life isn't random. Every moment, every choice, every whisper from God is building something eternal. This week, He's aligning you with opportunities that could change everything, your finances, your relationships, your purpose. But alignment requires attention. You can't drift through these 7 days on autopilot. You've got to lean in, listen hard, and move when He says move. Think of Esther. She didn't become queen by ignoring God's call. She heard, she acted, and a nation was saved. What's at stake for you? A breakthrough, a healing, a legacy? Only God knows the full weight, but He's ready to show you if you'll hear Him. Let's make this real. Drop another 777 in the comments to seal your commitment to listening this week. It's not just a number, it's a declaration that you're choosing God's voice over the noise. Do it, and let's keep going. The world will test you this week. Expect it. People will misunderstand you. Obstacles will feel personal. But God's voice is your anchor. It's not about avoiding the storm. It's about walking through it with unshakable certainty. Look at Noah. The world mocked him, called him crazy for building an ark in the sun. But he heard God's voice and didn't waver. When the rains came, he was ready. This week, your readiness depends on your ability to tune out the mockers and tune into God. What's He saying? Maybe it's to rest when everyone's pushing you to hustle. Maybe it's to speak when you'd rather stay silent. His voice is your map. You're not alone in this. Thousands of chosen ones are walking this path with you, hearing the same call, fighting the same battles. Join them. Hit that subscribe button to stand with souls who refuse to ignore God's voice. Together, we're stronger, holding each other accountable to stay focused, to stay faithful. This week isn't just another stretch of time. It's a divine window. God's voice will lead you to decisions that could shift your entire trajectory. Think of Joseph, sold into slavery, locked in a prison, yet hearing God's promise through every trial. When the moment came, he was ready, not because he forced it, but because he listened. This week, your readiness is everything. A single choice, guided by God's voice, could unlock doors you've been knocking on for years. A job offer, a restored relationship, a spark of clarity that changes how you see yourself. But you've got to hear him first. The cost of ignoring God's voice is steep. Look at Jonah. He ran from God's call, and it led him straight into a storm. The whale wasn't punishment. It was a wake-up call. This week, don't wait for the storm to force you to listen. Choose now to pay attention. God's not shouting to scare you. He's speaking to save you. His words are life, direction, protection. When you hear them, you'll see traps before you step into them. You'll find peace in chaos. You'll walk paths others can't even see. One more time, drop a 777 in the comments if you're ready to act on God's voice this week. Let the heavens know you're not ignoring this moment. You're all in, ready to move when he speaks. God's voice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet conviction, a sudden knowing, a verse that hits differently. This week, train yourself to notice. Set aside the phone, the noise, the endless scroll. Create space for silence, because that's where he speaks clearest. Think of Elijah. God wasn't in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He was in the still, small voice. This week, your breakthrough depends on catching that whisper. Maybe it's a nudge to pray for someone. Maybe it's a warning to avoid a decision. Whatever it is, trust it. God doesn't waste words. The enemy wants you distracted, scrolling, doubting, rushing. But you're not ordinary. You're a chosen one, set apart for a reason. This week, your ability to hear God will set you apart even more. Look at Daniel in the lion's den. The world expected him to be devoured, but God's voice guided him to safety. Your lions are circling, stress, fear, uncertainty, but God's voice is your shield. Listen, and you'll walk out untouched. Ignore it, and you're fighting alone. Your life is a story God's writing, and this week is a critical chapter. Every time you choose to listen, you're adding a page of victory. Every time you act on his voice, you're building a legacy. Think of Abraham stepping out into the unknown because God spoke. He didn't have a map, just a promise. This week, God's voice is your promise. It's the assurance that what's ahead is greater than what's behind. It's the guarantee that no matter how deadly the week feels, you're coming out stronger. You've got one more chance to claim this. Drop a 777 in the comments to stand firm in your choice to hear God this week. It's your way of saying, I'm listening. I'm ready. Let's keep moving forward. This week, God's voice will guide you to unexpected places. Maybe it's a conversation that shifts your perspective. Maybe it's a moment of courage you didn't know you had. Whatever it is, it's not random. God's weaving a tapestry, and every thread matters. Look at Ruth. Her simple choice to stay with Naomi led to a legacy that changed history. Your simple choice to listen this week could do the same. It could lead you to people, places, or opportunities you never imagined. But you've got to hear him first. The world will try to drown out God's voice with noise, deadlines, drama, distractions. But you're built for this. You're a chosen one, wired to hear what others miss. This week, sharpen that gift. Spend time in prayer, in scripture, in quiet. Let God's voice be the loudest thing you hear. When you do, you'll see his hand moving in ways you can't explain. Doors will open, burdens will lift, clarity will come. this isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. Keep listening, even when it's hard. You're not walking this path alone. Thousands of chosen ones are tuning into God's voice with you. Subscribe now to join them, to stay connected to this movement of faith and purpose. Together, we're unstoppable, anchored in the truth that God's voice is our guide. This week, expect resistance. The enemy knows you're close to a breakthrough, so the noise will get louder, the doubts sharper. But God's voice is your weapon. It's the sword that cuts through lies, the light that pierces shadows. Think of Jesus in the wilderness, 40 days, no food, Satan whispering temptation. But Jesus heard God's voice and stood firm. This week, you're in your own wilderness. The temptations might be different: fear, anger, procrastination. But the answer is the same. Hear God. Speak His truth. Stand tall. Every time you choose God's voice, you're rewriting the story of this week. What could have been deadly becomes divine. What could have broken you builds you. You're not just surviving these 7 days, you're shaping them. God's voice is your blueprint, showing you where to step, what to say, who to trust. Listen, and you'll see miracles unfold. Ignore it, and you might miss the moment that changes everything. This week isn't about avoiding danger. It's about facing it with God's guidance. You're not fragile. You're forged in His fire, built to withstand whatever comes. Look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, thrown into a furnace, yet untouched because they trusted God's voice. This week, your furnace might be a tough conversation, a financial scare, a personal doubt. But God's voice will lead you through, unscathed and stronger than ever. God's not playing games. His voice is your lifeline, your map, your victory. This week, make it your mission to hear Him above all else. Let go of distractions. Trust the nudges. Act on the whispers. You're a chosen one, called to rise, to shine, to overcome. This week is deadly only if you ignore Him. But if you listen, it's the week you'll look back on as the moment everything changed. God's voice is not just a sound. It's a force that reshapes your reality. This week, as you tune into it, you'll notice something remarkable. Your perspective shifts. Things that once overwhelmed you, like a mountain of stress or a tangle of decisions, start to look different. It's like putting on glasses for the first time. The blur clears, and you see paths where there were only walls. God's voice does that. It doesn't just guide, it reveals. This week, expect revelations, moments where you suddenly understand why you've been stuck, why certain doors stayed closed, or why a struggle was necessary. Think of Peter stepping out onto the water. The storm was raging, waves crashing, wind howling. Yet Jesus' voice, "Come," was all he needed to take that impossible step. This week, God's voice is your invitation to step out. Maybe it's a risk you've been avoiding, like starting a new venture or confronting a fear. The waves will feel real, but His voice is truer. Listen, and you'll find the courage to walk where others sink. Ignore it, and you might stay frozen, missing the miracle waiting just beyond your fear. Your heart knows when God speaks. It's that moment when a thought feels too big to be your own, when a peace settles despite the chaos. This week, those moments are your compass. They'll point you to choices that align with your purpose. Maybe it's a small act, like reaching out to someone you've been distant from. Maybe it's bigger, like walking away from a toxic job. God's voice doesn't always tell you what's easy. It tells you what's right. And when you follow it, you'll see how even the smallest obedience can unlock something massive. The enemy will try to muddy the waters. Expect confusion to creep in, mixed signals, second guesses, or people pulling you in wrong directions. But God's voice is distinct. It's not frantic or vague. It's clear, like a bell in the fog. Think of Samuel, a boy woken by God's call in the night. He didn't recognize it at first, but once he did, his life became a bridge between God and a nation. This week, you're Samuel. God's calling your name, maybe in ways you don't yet recognize. Stay open. Test the voice. If it leads to truth, to love, to growth, it's him. You're not ordinary. The world might treat you like just another face, but God sees you as his masterpiece, crafted for moments like this. This week, his voice will remind you of who you are. Not the version the world labels, too young, too old, too broken, but the chosen one, carrying a spark of the divine. When you hear him, you'll feel that spark ignite. It's the confidence to say no to what doesn't serve you, the strength to stand up when others back down, the clarity to chase what sets your soul on fire. Distractions are the enemy's oldest trick. This week, they'll come dressed as urgent emails, endless notifications, or drama that feels impossible to ignore. But you've got a choice. You can let the noise win, or you can carve out space for God's voice. Picture Mary sitting at Jesus' feet while Martha fussed over tasks. The world called Martha's work urgent, but Mary chose what was eternal. This week, choose like Mary. Find moments to sit still, to listen, to let God's words sink deep. Those moments will anchor you when everything else feels like quicksand. God's voice carries promises, and this week, those promises are active. They're not distant hopes. They're unfolding now. Think of Hannah, praying through tears for a child. God heard her, and Samuel was born, not just a son, but a prophet who changed history. Your prayers, your cries, your quiet hopes, they're not forgotten. This week, God's voice will confirm what he's already set in motion. Maybe it's a financial breakthrough you've been waiting for. Maybe it's healing in a relationship. Whatever it is, his voice will guide you to it, step by step. The world wants you to rush, to react, to fill every second with noise. But God's voice thrives in stillness. This week, create that space. It might be 5 minutes in the morning, a walk without your phone, or a moment of prayer before bed. Those pockets of quiet are where God meets you. Look at Jesus, retreating to the mountains to pray. The crowds demanded him, but he knew the Father's voice was his strength. This week, your strength lies in those quiet moments. They're not wasted time, they're sacred. You're part of something bigger. Thousands of chosen ones are listening, acting, and rising with you. Subscribe now to join them, to stay connected to this movement of faith and focus. Together, we're not just hearing God's voice, we're living it, proving it's more powerful than any storm. This week, God's voice will challenge you to let go. Maybe it's a grudge you've carried too long, a fear that's held you back, or a plan you've clung to that's no longer his will. Letting go feels like loss, but it's not. It's freedom. Think of the rich young ruler Jesus met. He heard God's voice, "Sell all you have and follow me." But he walked away, clinging to his wealth. Don't be him this week. When God speaks, trust that what he's asking you to release is making room for something greater. Every time you act on God's voice, you're building a foundation, not just for this week, but for generations. Your choices now ripple forward. Look at Abraham's obedience, leaving his home, trusting God's promise. It birthed a nation. Your obedience this week could birth something just as big, a legacy of faith, a family transformed, a purpose fulfilled. God's voice isn't just about today, it's about forever. Listen, and you're not just saving yourself from a deadly week. You're shaping a divine future. The enemy will try to make you doubt God's voice. You'll wonder, is this really him? Am I imagining it? But doubt is a tactic, not a truth. God's voice aligns with his character, love, truth, peace. Test it against Scripture. Lean on his promises. Think of Gideon, unsure if God was really speaking. He asked for signs, and God gave them. This week, if you're unsure, ask God for clarity. He's not offended by your questions. He's ready to confirm his voice in ways you can't miss. This week, God's voice will lead you to people who matter. Not everyone. Some will drain you, distract you, or pull you off course. But God will highlight the ones who align with your purpose. Maybe it's a mentor who speaks truth, a friend who lifts you up, or a stranger with a word you needed to hear. Think of Jonathan and David. Their friendship was no accident. God's voice brought them together to strengthen each other. Be open to those divine connections this week. They're not random, they're ordained. You're not just surviving this week, you're conquering it. God's voice is your strategy, your strength, your edge. When you listen, you move with precision, avoiding traps and seizing moments others miss. Look at Nehemiah, rebuilding Jerusalem's walls despite opposition. God's voice gave him the plan, the timing, the courage. This week, you're rebuilding something too. Maybe your confidence, your relationships, your dreams. God's voice is your blueprint. Follow it, and you'll build something unbreakable. The world will tell you to rely on logic, to trust only what you see. But God's voice operates beyond logic. It's the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. This week, lean into that faith. Trust the voice that tells you to move when logic says stay, to speak when silence feels safer, to wait when the world screams, hurry. Think of Noah again, building an ark for a flood no one believed was coming. His faith in God's voice saved him. Yours will too. God's voice isn't just about avoiding danger, it's about claiming victory. This week, He's not just protecting you, He's positioning you. Every word He speaks is setting you up for a breakthrough. Maybe it's a promotion you didn't expect, a door opening after years of waiting, or a moment of peace that feels like a miracle. Think of Joshua at Jericho. God's voice gave him an odd plan: march, shout, trust. But it worked. This week, God's plan for you might seem strange, but trust it. It's your Jericho moment. You're not just a listener, you're a doer. God's voice demands action. When He speaks, it's not for you to nod and move on, it's for you to move. This week, expect His voice to push you out of your comfort zone. Maybe it's speaking truth to someone who needs it. Maybe it's starting something you've delayed. Think of Peter again, not just walking on water, but preaching to thousands after Pentecost. God's voice turned a fisherman into a world changer. What's it turning you into this week? The stakes are high, but you're built for this. God's voice isn't just a guide, it's a power source. It fuels your courage, sharpens your focus, and lights your path. This week, plug into it. Let it drive every decision, every step. Look at Deborah leading Israel with God's words as her weapon. She didn't hesitate, didn't doubt. She acted. This week, be Deborah. Hear God, move boldly, and watch the impossible become your reality. Your life is a testament to God's faithfulness. Every time you've heard His voice before, it's led you through. This week is no different. The challenges might look deadly, but they're no match for a chosen one who listens. God's voice is your edge, your shield, your victory. Tune in, act fast, and watch this week transform from a threat to a triumph. God's voice is your compass in a world that's constantly shifting. This week, it's not just about hearing Him, it's about trusting the direction He's pointing you toward. You might feel pulled towards something unfamiliar, a path that doesn't make sense on paper. Maybe it's a new city, a career shift, or a conversation you've been dodging. But when God speaks, He's not guessing. He sees the end from the beginning. Think of Abraham again, told to leave everything, familiar for a land he'd never seen. His obedience didn't just change his life, it shaped history. This week, your obedience could do the same. The noise of the world will try to drown out God's voice. You'll face voices, friends, family, even your own doubts, telling you to play it safe, to stick to what's known. But God's voice isn't about safety. It's about destiny. It's the difference between staying comfortable and stepping into greatness. Look at Rahab, a woman with every reason to fear change. Yet she heard God's call through the spies and acted. Her choice saved her family and wove her into the lineage of Christ. This week, God's voice is weaving you into something bigger. Trust it, even when it feels risky. You're not just navigating this week, you're claiming it. God's voice is handing you the keys to moments that could define your future. Maybe it's a decision that sets you free from a cycle of stress. Maybe it's a bold move that unlocks a dream you've buried. Think of Caleb standing before a nation of doubters saying, "Give me this mountain." He heard God's promise and refused to settle for less. This week, what's your mountain? God's voice is urging you to claim it. Don't shrink back. Speak it. Step toward it. Own it. The enemy will try to make you question your worth. You'll feel whispers that you're not ready, not qualified, not chosen. But God's voice says otherwise. It's the affirmation that you're His, marked for a purpose no one can steal. Look at Jeremiah, called as a young man to speak for God. He felt inadequate, but God's voice was clear. "I knew you before I formed you." This week, let that truth anchor you. When doubts creep in, remember God's voice isn't swayed by your insecurities. He's calling you because He sees who you are, not who you think you're not. This week, God's voice will spark moments of clarity that cut through confusion. You'll have those sudden aha moments where everything clicks. A solution to a problem, a truth about a situation, a step you need to take. These aren't random, they're divine. Think of Paul on the road to Damascus, blinded by light but given a new vision. God's voice redirected his entire life in a moment. This week, your moments of clarity are redirection points. Pay attention. They're not accidents. They're appointments. You're part of a movement. Thousands of chosen ones are leaning into God's voice this week, just like you. Subscribe now to join them, to stay locked in with souls who are choosing faith over fear, purpose over chaos. Together, we're building something unstoppable, rooted in the truth that God's voice never fails. God's voice isn't just about big moments, it's in the small ones too. This week, notice the little prompts. A gut feeling to call someone, a nudge to pause before deciding, a word that sticks with you. These are God's fingerprints, guiding you through the ordinary to the extraordinary. Think of the boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. His small offering, guided by Jesus' voice, fed thousands. Your small acts of obedience this week could multiply in ways you can't imagine. Don't dismiss the little things. They're where miracles start. The world will push you to act fast, to decide without thinking. But God's voice calls for patience. Sometimes it says wait when you want to run, or move when you want to hide. This week, trust His timing. Look at Lazarus, dead 4 days, yet Jesus waited. Why? Because God's voice knew the miracle needed perfect timing. Your miracle this week might need you to wait, to trust, to hold steady. When you do, you'll see God move in ways that defy logic. You're not just hearing God's voice, you're carrying it. Every time you act on it, you're broadcasting His truth to the world. Your choices, your courage, your faith, they speak louder than words. Think of John the Baptist, a voice in the wilderness, preparing the way. His life shouted God's truth before he ever spoke. This week, your life is a megaphone. Every step you take in obedience amplifies God's presence, showing others what it looks like to live led by Him. The enemy will try to twist God's voice, making you second-guess what you heard, but you know His tone. Steady, loving, true. This week, hold fast to it. Test every thought against His word. If it brings peace, builds faith, or points to love, it's Him. Look at Jesus in the temple, flipping tables not out of anger, but obedience to God's voice. He knew what was true and acted without hesitation. This week, act with that same certainty. Clear out what doesn't belong. Stand firm in what does. God's voice is your shield against deception. This week, lies will come about your future, your value, your path. But His voice cuts through, sharp and clear. It's the truth that sets you free. Think of Eve in the garden, tempted by a lie because she doubted God's word. Don't let that be you. When God speaks, hold on to it like a lifeline. Write it down, pray it out, live it out. This week, every truth you anchor in His voice will protect you from a deadly misstep. You're not just surviving this week, you're thriving in it. God's voice is turning obstacles into opportunities, fear into faith, chaos into clarity. Look at Joseph again, interpreting dreams in a prison cell. God's voice turned his lowest moment into a launch pad for greatness. This week, your low moments are launch pads too. That argument, that setback, that uncertainty. God's voice can transform them into stepping stones. Listen closely, and you'll see how. The world measures success by what's seen, money, status, likes. But God's voice measures it differently. This week, He's redefining success for you. It might be a quiet victory, like forgiving someone who hurt you. It might be a bold one, like starting something new. Think of Mary Magdalene, faithful at the cross when others fled. Her success wasn't fame, it was devotion. This week, let God's voice define your wins. They're eternal, not temporary. God's voice is personal. It's not a generic broadcast. It's tailored to you. This week, expect it to speak to your specific needs, your unique battles. Maybe it's a word about your health, your family, your purpose. Look at Hagar, alone in the desert, yet God called her by name. His voice met her exactly where she was. This week, He's meeting you where you are. Trust that His words are for you, not someone else. They're your guide through this critical week. You're not just hearing God, you're becoming His voice. Every time you listen and obey, you reflect Him to the world. Your actions, your words, your choices, they carry His power. Think of Isaiah saying, "Here I am, send me." His obedience made him God's mouthpiece. This week, your obedience makes you His vessel. Speak what He gives you. Do what He asks. Your life will shine with His glory, turning a deadly week into a divine one. God's voice is your anchor in a world that's shaking. This week, when everything feels unsteady, finances, relationships, plans, His words will hold you firm. Look at the disciples in the storm, terrified until Jesus spoke, "Peace, be still." His voice calmed the waves and their hearts. This week, let His voice calm your storms. Speak His promises over your fears. Stand on His truth. You'll find peace that doesn't make sense, strength that defies the chaos. God's voice is your lifeline in a week that could pull you under if you're not anchored. This week, it's not just about hearing Him, it's about letting His words redefine your battles. The challenges you face aren't random, they're setups for your growth. Maybe it's a conflict at work, a strain in a relationship, or a fear that keeps resurfacing. When you listen to God, those battles become stepping stones. Think of David, not just facing Goliath, but navigating Saul's jealousy. God's voice gave him wisdom to outmaneuver threats without losing his heart. This week, His voice will show you how to face your giants with strategy, not just strength. The world will tempt you to react in haste, to lash out, to retreat, to overthink. But God's voice calls for precision. It's the difference between swinging wildly and striking true. This week, expect His words to guide your responses. Maybe it's staying calm when someone provokes you. Maybe it's speaking up when silence feels easier. Look at Abigail, who heard God's wisdom and acted swiftly to save her household from David's anger. Her words, guided by God, turned a crisis into peace. Your words, your actions, guided by Him, can do the same this week. You're not just a bystander in your life. You're a builder. God's voice is handing you the tools to construct something lasting. This week, every choice you make in obedience is a brick laid in your future. It could be a small act, writing a goal, helping a stranger, praying through a doubt that builds towards something bigger. Think of Nehemiah again, laying one stone at a time to rebuild Jerusalem's walls. Each stone mattered. This week, your small obediences matter. God's voice is showing you where to place them, turning dreams into reality. The enemy will try to cloud your vision, making you feel lost or alone. But God's voice is your light, piercing through the fog. It's the assurance that you're seen, known, and called. Look at Elijah again, hiding in a cave, feeling abandoned. God's whisper reminded him he wasn't alone. 7,000 others stood faithful. This week, you're not alone either. God's voice will remind you of your place, your purpose, your people. Trust it, and you'll see connections and confirmations that keep you grounded. You're part of a divine movement. Thousands of chosen ones are hearing God's voice alongside you, building lives that reflect His truth. Subscribe now to join them, to lock arms with souls who choose faith over doubt, action over fear. Together, we're a force, amplifying God's voice in a world desperate for it. This week, God's voice will call you to rest as much as it calls you to act. The world glorifies hustle, but God knows when you need to pause. Maybe it's a moment to breathe before a big decision, or a day to step back from the grind. Think of Jesus slipping away to pray despite the crowds. His rest wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. This week, listen for God's nudge to slow down. That pause could reveal a truth you'd miss in the rush, a clarity that changes everything. Your faith is a muscle, and this week, God's voice is your trainer. Every time you listen, you grow stronger. Every time you act, you build endurance. Maybe it's trusting Him with a financial worry. Maybe it's forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it. Look at Job, holding fast to God's voice through unimaginable loss. His faith didn't just survive, it thrived, leading to restoration beyond what he'd known. This week, your faith will stretch, but God's voice will guide you to rewards you can't yet see. The world will try to define your limits, what you can achieve, who you can become, but God's voice shatters those ceilings. This week, expect Him to challenge your view of what's possible. Maybe it's a dream you've shelved, thinking it's too big. Maybe it's a step you've avoided, thinking you're not ready. Think of Moses, a stammering shepherd called to lead a nation. God's voice didn't ask for his qualifications. It demanded his obedience. This week, God's asking for yours. Step out and watch Him redefine your limits. God's voice is your anchor in a storm of opinions. This week, people will weigh in on your choices, your path, your worth. But only one voice matters. Tune out the chatter and lock into God. Think of Daniel again, facing a king's decree to bow or die. God's voice gave him courage to stand, and lions became his testimony. This week, your testimony is forming. Every time you choose God's voice over the crowds, you're writing a story of faith that will outlast the noise. You're not just hearing God's voice, you're reflecting it. Your life, your choices, your resilience mirrors His truth to everyone around you. This week, expect your actions to speak. Maybe it's kindness in a tense moment, or boldness in a quiet one. Look at Ruth again, her loyalty to Naomi reflecting God's faithfulness. Her quiet obedience drew Boaz's attention and changed her future. This week, your obedience will draw attention too, not for your glory, but for God's. Live it and watch others notice. The enemy will try to make you feel small, like your choices don't matter. But God's voice says every step counts. This week, no decision is too small to carry weight. A word you speak, a boundary you set, a prayer you pray, each one shapes your path. Think of the widow who gave 2 small coins. Jesus saw her offering as greater than the rich men's gifts. This week, your small acts, guided by God's voice, are massive in His eyes. Don't underestimate them. God's voice is your guide through uncertainty. This week, you'll face moments where the path isn't clear, decisions with no easy answers, situations with high stakes, but His voice is your clarity. It's the whisper that says, "This is the way, walk in it." Look at the Magi following a star to find Jesus. They didn't have a map, just a sign and a promise. This week, God's voice is your star. Follow it, even when the road feels strange or the destination unclear. You're not just surviving this week, you're shaping it. God's voice is giving you authority to call things into being. Speak His promises over your life. Declare peace over chaos, provision over lack, courage over fear. Think of Ezekiel speaking to dry bones until they lived. His voice, aligned with God's, brought life to the dead. This week, your voice, aligned with His, can bring life to your dreams, your relationships, your future. Speak what He speaks and watch it take form. The world will try to pull you into its rhythm, fast, frantic, fleeting. But God's voice sets a different pace. This week, let it steady you. It's the rhythm of trust, of purpose, of eternity. Look at Mary, the mother of Jesus, pondering God's words in her heart. She didn't rush or panic. She trusted His timing. This week, trust His pace. When you move with God's voice, every step is perfectly timed, every moment perfectly placed. You're not just a listener, you're a warrior. God's voice equips you to fight battles others can't see. This week, your fight might be internal, against fear, shame, or doubt. Or it might be external, against opposition, setbacks, or lies. Think of Deborah again. Not just a judge, but a prophetess who heard God and led an army to victory. Her weapon was His voice. This week, yours is too. Wield it, and no battle will overcome you. God's voice is your shield in a week designed to test your resolve. The pressures you face, deadlines, expectations, conflicts, are not just obstacles. They're invitations to stand firm. This week, His voice will guide you to hold your ground, not with anger or fear, but with quiet strength. Think of Daniel in the court of Babylon, surrounded by schemes yet anchored by God's words. His refusal to bow didn't just save him, it revealed God's power to a kingdom. This week, your steadfastness will reveal His power in your world. The world will push you to conform, to blend into its chaos. But God's voice calls you to stand out. It's the whisper that reminds you you're different, set apart for a reason. Maybe it's saying no to a compromise that feels tempting. Maybe it's choosing integrity when no one's watching. Look at Joseph again, rejecting Potiphar's wife. That choice, guided by God, kept his destiny intact. This week, your choices, guided by His voice, will keep your path clear. Don't bend, even when the pressure feels relentless. You're not just walking through this week, you're carving a path. God's voice is your chisel, shaping every moment into something purposeful. Each decision you make, each word you speak, is a stroke that defines your legacy. Think of Esther again, her courage in approaching the king. One moment, guided by God, saved a nation. This week, your moments matter. A single act of obedience, a prayer, a step, a stand, could shift the course of your life. Listen closely and let His voice shape your path. The enemy will try to sow impatience, making you feel like God's timing is too slow, but His voice is your reminder that every delay has a purpose. This week, trust the waiting. Maybe it's a job that hasn't come through, a door that's still closed, a dream that feels stalled. Look at Sarah, waiting decades for Isaac. God's voice promised, and she held on. This week, hold on. His voice will show you that the waiting is preparation, not punishment. You're part of a divine army. Thousands of chosen ones are standing with you, listening to God's voice, refusing to bow to the world's noise. Subscribe now to join them, to align with souls who know that His voice is their strength. Together, we're not just surviving, we're shining, showing the world what it means to live led by God. This week, God's voice will call you to see beyond the surface. The situations you face, whether a conflict, a loss, or an opportunity, aren't what they seem. His voice reveals the hidden truth, the bigger picture. Maybe a setback is a setup for something greater. Maybe a closed door is protecting you from a wrong path. Think of Balaam, stopped by an angel he couldn't see until God opened his eyes. This week, ask God to open your eyes. His voice will show you what's really at play. Your heart is a receiver, tuned to God's frequency. This week, guard that connection. The world will try to jam the signal with worry, gossip, or distractions, but you can choose what you let in. Spend time in His Word, in prayer, in worship. Think of Hannah again, pouring out her soul in the temple. Her heart was open, and God's voice met her there. This week, keep your heart open. His voice will fill it with hope, direction, and strength you didn't know you had. God's voice is your foundation when everything else shakes. This week, expect tremors, moments that test your stability. Maybe it's a financial scare, a family tension, or a personal doubt. But His voice is the rock you stand on. Look at Peter again, denying Jesus but restored by His words, "Feed my sheep." That voice rebuilt him from failure to leader. This week, let it rebuild you. Whatever shakes, His voice will hold you steady, turning instability into opportunity. The world will try to measure your worth by what you do, what you have, who you know. But God's voice measures you by who you are, His chosen, His beloved, His masterpiece. This week, let that truth sink deep. When you feel overlooked or undervalued, hear Him say, "You are mine." Think of Leah, unloved by man but seen by God. Her son Judah carried the line of Christ. This week, your worth isn't in others' eyes, it's in His voice. Live from that truth and watch how it changes you. You're not just reacting to this week, you're creating it. God's voice gives you the power to shape your reality. Speak His promises over your life. Pray His truth into your circumstances. Think of Joshua again, circling Jericho in silence until God said shout. His obedience, aligned with God's voice, brought walls down. This week, your obedience can bring walls down too. Barriers of fear, lack, or doubt. Speak what He speaks and watch your reality shift. The enemy will try to make you feel isolated, like you're fighting alone, but God's voice reminds you of your connection to Him, to His people, to His plan. This week, expect divine encounters. Maybe it's a conversation that lifts you, a message that confirms what you've heard, or a stranger who speaks His truth. Look at Elijah meeting Elisha. God's voice orchestrated a bond that changed both their lives. This week, stay open to who God brings. They're part of His plan for you. God's voice is your map through uncharted territory. This week, you'll face moments where the way forward isn't clear, a decision, a risk, a leap, but His voice is the guide that never fails. Think of the Israelites at the Jordan River, waters blocking their path. God spoke, and the river stopped. This week, your Jordan is waiting. His voice will show you when to step, how to move, where to go. Trust it, and the impossible will part before you. You're not just enduring this week. you're transforming it. God's voice turns ordinary days into divine moments. Every challenge is a chance to grow. Every choice a chance to shine. Look at Gideon again, a hesitant farmer turned mighty warrior because he heard God's call. This week, you're turning too, from doubt to courage, from fear to faith. His voice is the catalyst. Lean into it and watch how it reshapes your story. The world will try to pull you into its drama. Petty conflicts, endless worries, fleeting trends. But God's voice lifts you above it. It's the perspective that says, this too shall pass. This week, let His voice keep you focused on what lasts. Faith, love, purpose. Think of Paul and Silas singing in prison. Their worship, guided by God, broke chains. Your worship, your focus on His voice, can break chains this week too. Sing through the struggle and watch freedom come. You're not just a follower of God's voice, you're a carrier of it. Your words, your actions, your presence, they echo His truth. This week, expect your life to speak. Maybe it's a kind word that shifts someone's day. Maybe it's a stand that inspires others. Look at John the Baptist again, his life a proclamation of God's coming. Your life proclaims too. Live it boldly, guided by His voice, and watch how it changes those around you. God's voice is your spark in a week that could feel dark. This week, it's not just about listening. It's about letting His words ignite something new inside you. Maybe it's a passion you've let fade, a dream you've shelved, or a courage you've buried. His voice is the flame that brings it back to life. Think of Jeremiah, called to speak when he felt too young. God's voice didn't just guide him, it set his purpose ablaze. This week, let His voice light up your path, turning dim moments into bursts of possibility. The world will try to smother that spark with routine. Endless tasks, predictable patterns, numbing distractions. But God's voice breaks through, calling you to rise above the ordinary. It might be a nudge to create something new, to step out in faith, or to trust a vision others can't see. Look at Bezalel, an artisan filled with God's Spirit to craft the tabernacle. His work wasn't just skill, it was divine inspiration. This week, your work, your choices, can be inspired too. Listen, and let His voice turn the mundane into the miraculous. You're not just moving through this week, you're marking it. God's voice is your pen, writing a story of triumph with every step you take. Maybe it's a moment of honesty that heals a rift. Maybe it's a decision to pursue a goal you've doubted. Think of Zacchaeus climbing a tree to see Jesus. God's voice called him down, and that moment rewrote his life. This week, your moments are rewriting yours. Every time you act on His voice, you're adding a chapter of faith, courage, and purpose. The enemy will try to steal your focus, filling your mind with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. But God's voice is your clarity, cutting through the haze. It's the truth that says you're stronger than your fears, bigger than your doubts. Look at Peter again, stepping out of the boat. The wind howled, but Jesus' voice was louder. This week, your fears might howl, but God's voice is stronger. Trust it, and you'll walk on waters others think impossible. You're part of a holy uprising. Thousands of chosen ones are hearing God's voice with you, choosing purpose over chaos, faith over fear. Subscribe now to join them, to stand with souls who know His voice is their power. Together, we're not just living this week, we're transforming it, showing the world what God's guidance can do. This week, God's voice will call you to see yourself differently. The world might label you by your past, your mistakes, your struggles, your limits, but His voice calls you by your future, redeemed, chosen, unstoppable. Maybe it's time to let go of an old story you've told yourself, like, I'm not enough. Think of Saul, transformed into Paul. God's voice didn't just change his name, it changed his identity. This week, let His voice redefine who you are. Step into the person He sees. Your actions this week are seeds, and God's voice is the soil. Every choice you make in obedience plants something that will grow. Maybe it's a kind word to someone hurting. Maybe it's a bold step toward a dream. Think of the sower in Jesus' parable, scattering seeds with faith. Some fell on rocky ground, but others took root. This week, plant your seeds in the fertile ground of God's voice. Act on His prompts and watch what grows: peace, opportunity, impact. The world will try to rush you into decisions that feel urgent, but lead nowhere. God's voice, though, is your rhythm. It sets a pace that's steady, not frantic. Maybe it's waiting one more day before responding to a conflict. Maybe it's taking a moment to pray before acting. Look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, pausing to pray before the cross. His obedience to God's voice carried Him through. This week, let His voice carry you. Move at His pace, and you'll avoid traps disguised as urgency. You're not just hearing God's voice, you're echoing it. Your life, your choices, your resilience speaks His truth to those around you. This week, expect your presence to shift atmospheres. Maybe it's a smile that lifts a stranger's day. Maybe it's a stand that inspires a friend. Think of Stephen, whose faith shone even as he faced death. His life preached louder than words. Your life preaches too. Live it in tune with God's voice and watch how it changes the air around you. The enemy will try to make you feel stuck, like this week is just another loop of the same struggles. But God's voice says you're moving forward. Every step you take with Him is progress, even if it feels small. Look at the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. Each step through the parted waters was a miracle, even before they reached the other side. This week, your steps are miracles too. Trust His voice, and you'll see how far you've come, even in 7 days. God's voice is your lens, helping you see opportunities where others see obstacles. This week, expect to spot openings, a chance to grow, to connect, to heal. Maybe it's a conversation that opens a door. Maybe it's a failure that teaches you strength. Think of Ruth again, gleaning in Boaz's field. What looked like survival was God's voice leading her to redemption. This week, your ordinary moments are divine setups. Listen, and you'll see the opportunities others miss. You're not just surviving this week, you're steering it. God's voice gives you the wheel, guiding you through twists and turns. Every decision you make in faith is a turn toward your destiny. Think of Jonah again, redirected by God's voice after running. His obedience turned a detour into a mission. This week, your detours are missions too. That delay, that challenge, God's voice can turn it into purpose. Steer with Him, and you'll end up exactly where you're meant to be. The world will try to weigh you down with burdens, guilt, stress, expectations. But God's voice lifts them off. It's the promise that says, "My yoke is easy, my burden is light." This week, let His voice free you. Maybe it's letting go of a regret that's haunted you. Maybe it's releasing a worry you can't control. Look at the woman at the well, carrying shame until Jesus spoke. His voice set her free. This week, let His voice do the same for you. Walk lighter and watch how far you go. God's voice is your strength when you feel weak. This week, you'll face moments that test your endurance. Long hours, tough talks, inner battles. But His voice is the power that keeps you standing. Think of Samson, regaining strength after failure because he turned back to God. His final act shook an empire. This week, your strength, fueled by God's voice, can shake your obstacles. Lean into it, and you'll stand taller than you thought possible. You're not just hearing God's voice, you're becoming it. Your life is a living message of His truth. This week, expect your actions to carry His weight. Maybe it's a choice to forgive when it's hard. Maybe it's a risk that feels daunting. Think of Ananias, sent to pray for Saul despite fear. His obedience, guided by God's voice, changed the world. Your obedience this week can change your world too. Act on His voice and watch His power flow through you. God's voice is your compass in a week that could feel like a maze. The twists and turns, unexpected challenges, sudden decisions, fleeting doubts might make you question your direction. But His voice is the thread that leads you through. It's the quiet assurance that says, "Keep going, I'm with you." Think of Theseus navigating the labyrinth, a single thread guiding him to victory. This week, God's voice is your thread. Follow it and you'll find your way through any complexity, emerging stronger on the other side. The world will try to overwhelm you with choices, each one screaming for attention. But God's voice is your filter, showing you what's worth your time. Maybe it's saying yes to a project that scares you. Maybe it's saying no to a distraction disguised as opportunity. Look at Nehemiah again, sifting through threats and demands to focus on God's call. His clarity rebuilt a city. This week, your clarity, guided by His voice, can rebuild your focus, your purpose, your peace. Trust it to show you what matters. You're not just passing through this week, you're planting flags. Every moment you listen to God's voice, you're claiming ground for His kingdom. Maybe it's a kind gesture that shifts someone's perspective. Maybe it's a bold move that sets a new course. Think of Caleb again, claiming his mountain despite giants. His faith in God's promise marked the land. This week, your faith marks your life. Every obedient step plants a flag of victory, declaring that God's voice reigns here. The enemy will try to stir confusion, making you doubt what you heard. But God's voice is steady, like a lighthouse in a storm. It doesn't waver, doesn't fade. This week, anchor yourself to it. Test every thought against His truth. If it brings peace, aligns with love, points to growth, it's Him. Look at Samuel again, learning to recognize God's call. His openness turned a boy into a prophet. This week, your openness can turn doubts into direction. Stay tuned in and confusion will lose its grip. You're part of a sacred movement. Thousands of chosen ones are standing with you, hearing God's voice, choosing faith over chaos. Subscribe now to join them, to unite with souls who know His voice is their guide. Together, we're not just navigating this week, we're transforming it, proving God's truth is stronger than any storm. This week, God's voice will call you to trust His process, even when it feels slow. The world demands instant results, but His voice teaches patience. Maybe it's waiting for an answer you desperately want. Maybe it's trusting a door will open when it's time. Think of Elizabeth, barren for years, yet holding on to God's promise. Her faith birthed John the Baptist. This week, your faith, guided by His voice, is birthing something too. Trust the process, and you'll see His timing is perfect. Your life is a canvas, and God's voice is the brush. Every choice you make in obedience paints a stroke of His masterpiece. Maybe it's a moment of courage that changes a relationship. Maybe it's a quiet act of faith that shifts your future. Think of David's Psalms, each one a brushstroke of trust in God's voice. His words painted a legacy of worship. This week, your actions paint yours. Listen to His voice and let every stroke build something beautiful, eternal. The world will try to pull you into its current, dragging you toward worry or haste. But God's voice is your anchor, holding you steady. It's the reminder that you're not defined by the chaos around you. This week, let His voice keep you centered. Maybe it's breathing through a stressful moment. Maybe it's standing firm when others push you to bend. Look at Daniel again, praying despite a death decree. His anchor was God's voice, and it saved him. Yours will too, keeping you steady in the rush. You're not just hearing God's voice, you're amplifying it. Your life, your choices, your peace. echoes His truth to everyone around you. This week, expect your presence to shift rooms. Maybe it's a word of encouragement that lifts a coworker. Maybe it's a calm response that diffuses tension. Think of Barnabas, whose name means son of encouragement. His life, guided by God, lifted others. Your life, guided by His voice, does the same this week. Live it and watch others feel His presence through you. The enemy will try to make you feel powerless, like your actions don't matter. But God's voice says every step counts. This week, no moment is too small to carry His power. A prayer, a smile, a choice to trust, they ripple beyond what you see. Think of the widow's oil, multiplied by Elisha's obedience to God's voice. Her small faith-filled jars. Your small faith, guided by His voice, can fill lives this week. Don't dismiss the little things. They're where God works wonders. God's voice is your map through hidden dangers. This week, expect traps, subtle lies, tempting shortcuts, draining distractions. But His voice sees what you can't. It's the warning that says, turn left, when the right looks easier. Look at Joseph again, dodging Potiphar's wife. God's voice kept him from a trap that could have derailed his destiny. This week, let His voice keep you from yours. Listen closely, and you'll sidestep dangers others fall into. You're not just enduring this week, you're shaping its outcome. God's voice gives you the power to turn challenges into victories. Every obstacle is a chance to trust Him more. Maybe it's a financial strain that pushes you to pray. Maybe it's a conflict that forces you to forgive. Think of Hezekiah facing an army he couldn't beat. God's voice told him to stand firm, and the enemy fell. This week, stand firm in His voice and watch your enemies, fear, doubt, chaos, fall. The world will try to define your success by numbers, money, followers, achievements. But God's voice defines it by faithfulness. This week, success isn't what you gain, it's what you give. Trust, obedience, love. Look at the boy who gave his lunch to Jesus. His small act fed thousands. Your small acts, guided by God's voice, can feed souls this week. Give what He asks and watch how He multiplies it beyond your imagination. God's voice is your strength when the week feels heavy. Maybe it's a burden you're carrying, grief, stress, uncertainty. His voice says, cast it on me. This week, let Him carry what's too much for you. Think of Hannah again, pouring out her pain in prayer. God's voice met her, turning sorrow into joy. Your sorrows, your weights, His voice can turn them too. Share them with Him and feel the load lift, replaced by a peace that holds you up. You're not just a listener of God's voice. You're a light because of it. Your obedience shines, showing others what faith looks like. This week, expect your life to draw attention, not for your sake, but for His. Maybe it's a choice that sparks curiosity. Maybe it's a joy that doesn't make sense. Think of Philip sharing the gospel with the Ethiopian. His obedience, guided by God's voice, lit a spark that spread. Your obedience this week lights sparks too. Live it and watch others see God through you. God's voice is your lifeline when the week feels like a battlefield. The conflicts you face, whether with others or within yourself, are not meant to break you, but to build you. This week, His voice will show you how to fight, not with fists or fear, but with faith and focus. Think of David again, not just slaying Goliath, but enduring years of Saul's pursuit. God's voice taught him when to hide, when to stand, when to trust. This week, let His voice teach you. It'll show you how to navigate your battles with wisdom, turning war zones into victories. The world will try to pull you into its frenzy, urging you to react without thinking. But God's voice calls for discernment. It's the pause that says, wait, see this clearly. Maybe it's a decision that feels urgent, a job offer, a move, a confrontation. His voice will guide you to act with purpose, not panic. Look at Abigail again, calming David's wrath with measured words. Her discernment, guided by God, saved lives. This week, your discernment, guided by His voice, can save moments, relationships, or dreams. Trust it to show you the right move. You're not just surviving this week, you're sowing seeds for a harvest. Every act of obedience to God's voice is a seed planted in eternity. Maybe it's a prayer for someone struggling. Maybe it's a step toward a goal you've hesitated on. Think of Cornelius, a Gentile whose prayers and generosity caught God's attention. His obedience opened a door for the gospel to spread. This week, your obedience opens doors too. Sow faithfully, guided by His voice, and watch what grows. Blessings, breakthroughs, legacy. The enemy will try to make you feel trapped, like your options are shrinking. But God's voice is your key, unlocking paths you didn't see. This week, expect His words to reveal exits where you saw walls. Maybe it's a solution to a problem that's kept you up at night. Maybe it's a perspective that frees you from worry. Look at Peter in prison, bound until an angel, God's voice in action, set him free. This week, His voice is your freedom. Listen, and you'll walk out of cages others stay locked in. You're part of a divine alliance. Thousands of chosen ones are tuning into God's voice with you, choosing purpose over chaos, faith over doubt. Subscribe now to join them, to stand with souls who know His voice is their anchor. Together, we're not just facing this week, we're shaping it, proving God's guidance is stronger than any storm. This week, God's voice will call you to rest in His promises, even when the world demands action. The pressure to fix everything, your finances, your relationships, your fears, can feel overwhelming. But His voice says, "Be still, I'm working." Maybe it's trusting Him with a need you can't meet. Maybe it's letting go of a fight you can't win. Think of Mary again, sitting at Jesus' feet while Martha fretted. Her rest was worship. This week, your rest, guided by His voice, is worship too. Trust Him and watch Him work. Your life is a testimony, and God's voice is the story it tells. Every choice you make this week, every step you take in faith, speaks of His presence. Maybe it's a moment of kindness in a tense situation. Maybe it's a bold stand for what's right. Think of Stephen again, his face glowing as he spoke God's truth. His life testified even in death. Your life testifies this week too. Live it in tune with His voice, and others will see Him through you, even without words. The world will try to define your path by its rules: success, safety, status. But God's voice charts a different course. This week, expect Him to lead you off the beaten path. Maybe it's a risk that feels foolish, like starting something new. Maybe it's a choice others won't understand, like forgiving the unforgivable. Look at Noah again, building an ark amid ridicule. His path, guided by God's voice, saved his family. Your path, guided by His voice, can save what matters most this week. Follow it, no matter how strange it seems. You're not just hearing God's voice, you're carrying His power. Every time you obey, you unleash His strength in your life. This week, expect that power to show up. Maybe it's courage to face a fear. Maybe it's wisdom to solve a problem. Think of Elisha, calling down God's fire to prove His presence. His obedience shook a nation. Your obedience, guided by His voice, can shake your world too. Act on it and watch His power flow through your choices. The enemy will try to make you feel ordinary, like your life doesn't matter. But God's voice declares you're extraordinary, chosen for a purpose that echoes beyond this week. Look at Esther again, an orphan turned queen because she heard God's call. Her life wasn't just hers, it was a nation's salvation. This week, your life isn't just yours either. His voice will show you how your choices ripple. into your family, your community, your future. Live them boldly and watch the impact unfold. God's voice is your clarity when the week feels foggy. Confusion will come, mixed signals, competing priorities, inner doubts. But His voice is the light that cuts through. It's the truth that says, this is your next step. Maybe it's a nudge to apologize. Maybe it's a prompt to wait. Think of Paul again, redirected by a vision to Macedonia. His obedience spread the gospel. This week, your obedience, guided by His voice, can spread light too. Trust it, and the fog will clear. You're not just navigating this week, you're building a legacy. Every moment you listen to God's voice, you're laying bricks for something eternal. Maybe it's a habit of prayer that strengthens your faith. Maybe it's a choice to love when it's hard. Think of Abraham's altar, built to honor God's promise. Each stone was a step toward a covenant. This week, your choices are stones too. Build with His voice, and your legacy will stand firm, unshaken by time. The world will try to pull you into its fears, economic woes, global unrest, personal uncertainties. But God's voice is your peace, a calm that doesn't depend on circumstances. This week, let it steady you. Maybe it's speaking His promises over a worry. Maybe it's resting in His care when panic tempts you. Look at Jesus asleep in the boat during a storm. His peace came from God's voice. Your peace, guided by His voice, can silence storms too. Rest in it and watch fear lose its grip. You're not just a follower of God's voice. You're a force because of it. Your obedience carries weight, shifting the world around you. This week, expect your actions to make waves. Maybe it's a stand for truth that inspires someone. Maybe it's a sacrifice that changes a heart. Think of Rahab again, hiding the spies. Her faith, guided by God, saved her family and shaped history. Your faith, guided by His voice, shapes history too. Act on it and watch the waves spread. God's voice is your guide when the week feels like a crossroads. You'll face choices, big or small, that could change your trajectory. His voice is the signpost, pointing you to the right path. Maybe it's choosing forgiveness over resentment. Maybe it's stepping into a role you feel unprepared for. Look at Jonah again, redirected by God's voice to Nineveh. His obedience saved a city. This week, your obedience, guided by His voice, can save moments, dreams, or relationships. Choose His path and watch where it leads. God's voice is your beacon when the week feels like a fog. The haze of uncertainty, decisions, doubts, distractions can make you feel lost. But His voice is the light that pierces through, showing you the way. This week, expect it to guide you through moments that feel unclear. Maybe it's a choice about a relationship, a career move, or a personal goal. Think of the Magi again, following a star through the unknown. Their trust in God's sign led them to Jesus. This week, trust His voice to lead you to your purpose, even when the path seems dim. The world will try to drown you in noise, endless opinions, breaking news, urgent demands. But God's voice is your signal, clear and unshaken. It's the whisper that cuts through the clutter, telling you what's true. Maybe it's a prompt to step back from a heated argument. Maybe it's a nudge to pursue a dream others dismiss. Look at Samuel again, hearing God's call in the quiet of night. His response shaped a nation. This week, your response to His voice can shape your future. Tune out the noise and let His truth lead. You're not just drifting through this week. You're forging a path. Every step you take in obedience to God's voice is a hammer strike, shaping your destiny. Maybe it's a moment of courage to speak truth. Maybe it's a quiet act of trust in His plan. Think of Jacob, wrestling with God through the night. His persistence, guided by God's presence, gave him a new name and purpose. This week, your persistence, guided by His voice, forges something new in you. Keep striking and watch your path take shape. The enemy will try to plant fear, making you question if you're on the right track. But God's voice is your assurance, reminding you that you're exactly where you need to be. This week, let it silence your doubts. Maybe it's trusting Him with a financial worry. Maybe it's believing in a future others can't see. Look at Hannah again, praying through barrenness. God's voice promised her a son, and she held on. Your promises are alive this week too. Hold on to His voice, and fear will lose its hold. You're part of a holy tide. Thousands of chosen ones are rising with you, hearing God's voice, choosing faith over chaos. Subscribe now to join them, to stand with souls who know His voice is their strength. Together, we're not just moving through this week. We're claiming it, showing the world what it means to live guided by God. This week, God's voice will call you to release what's weighing you down. Maybe it's a grudge that's grown heavy, a habit that's holding you back, or a fear that's clouding your vision. His voice says, let it go. Think of Peter again, leaving his nets to follow Jesus. That release wasn't loss, it was freedom. This week, your release, guided by His voice, is freedom too. Let go of what He's asking, and you'll find space for blessings you didn't expect. Peace, clarity, opportunity. Your life is a symphony, and God's voice is the conductor. Every choice you make this week, every act of faith, is a note in His masterpiece. Maybe it's a kind word in a tense moment. Maybe it's a bold step toward a goal. Think of David's harp, soothing Saul's torment. His music, guided by God, brought peace. Your actions, guided by His voice, bring peace too, not just to you, but to those around you. Play your notes this week and watch how they harmonize into something beautiful. The world will try to box you in, telling you who you should be or what you should want. But God's voice sets you free, reminding you of your true identity. This week, expect it to affirm who you are, His chosen, His beloved, His warrior. Maybe it's standing tall when others doubt you. Maybe it's embracing a calling you've questioned. Look at Gideon again, called a mighty warrior despite his fears. God's voice redefined him. This week, let it redefine you. Live from His truth, not the world's labels. You're not just hearing God's voice, you're reflecting His light. Your obedience shines, showing others what faith looks like in action. This week, expect your life to draw eyes. Maybe it's a choice that sparks hope. Maybe it's a calm that defies chaos. Think of Daniel's friends, unshaken in the furnace. Their faith, guided by God, made a king see His power. Your faith, guided by His voice, can do the same this week. Live it boldly, and others will see God through you. The enemy will try to make you feel rushed, like you're running out of time. But God's voice is your reminder that His timing is perfect. This week, trust His rhythm. Maybe it's waiting for an answer instead of forcing one. Maybe it's acting when you'd rather wait. Look at Lazarus again, raised after 4 days. God's voice timed the miracle perfectly. Your miracles are timed perfectly too. Listen to His voice, and you'll move in sync with His plan, not the world's hurry. God's voice is your strength when the week feels draining. Maybe it's a long to-do list, a family tension, or an inner struggle. His voice says, I've got you. This week, lean into it. Speak His promises over your exhaustion. Pray His truth into your challenges. Think of Elijah, fed by ravens in a drought. God's voice sustained him. Your strength, guided by His voice, will sustain you too. Tap into it, and you'll find energy for battles you thought you couldn't fight. You're not just navigating this week, you're rewriting it. God's voice gives you the pen to turn trials into triumphs. Every challenge is a chance to trust Him more. Maybe it's a setback that teaches you resilience. Maybe it's a conflict that builds your courage. Think of Joseph again, sold into slavery, yet rising to power. His trials, guided by God's voice, wrote a story of redemption. Your trials, guided by His voice, write your story too. Trust it and watch the narrative shift. The world will try to make you feel small, like your choices don't matter. But God's voice says you're significant. Every step counts. This week, expect your actions to carry weight. Maybe it's a prayer that shifts a situation. Maybe it's a stand that changes a heart. Look at the boy with the loaves and fish again. His small gift, guided by Jesus, fed thousands. Your gifts, guided by God's voice, can feed lives this week too. Offer them and watch His power multiply them. God's voice is your guide through unseen battles. This week, expect fights you can't see, spiritual attacks, hidden doubts, subtle pressures. His voice is your radar, spotting what's coming. Maybe it's a warning to avoid a decision. Maybe it's a nudge to pray harder. Think of Jesus in the wilderness again, countering Satan's lies with God's truth. His voice was his weapon. This week yours is too. Wield it, and you'll defeat what's lurking before it takes hold. You're not just living this week, you're leaving a mark. Every moment you listen to God's voice, you're etching His truth into your life and others. Maybe it's a choice that inspires someone. Maybe it's a faith that steadies a storm. Think of Ruth again, her loyalty leaving a legacy through Boaz. Your loyalty to God's voice leaves a legacy too. Live it this week and watch how your mark, His mark, changes everything around you.